Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, President Jim, and thank all of you for having me here today. As Dan mentioned, I've been traveling quite a bit, and it's been pretty incredible to visit Rotary clubs not only all over North America, but all around the world. And what we have in Rotary is a really great connection to different cultures and different places. And if you travel, I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that, because I've met some really incredible people and visited some really incredible places based off of Rotary. I've been living full-time as a nomad for the last year and a half, and my life in general looks quite a bit different than it did 5 years ago. Back then I was still a member of Rotary, here visiting each week, even Rotary Club president. So I thought a little bit about how I got to where I am today, and what keeps coming back to me is the fact that I'm living this lifestyle, what I call anti-comfortable. And what I mean by anti-comfortable is most of the decisions I make about my life, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go, how I'm going to do it, is based off of comfort. And typically if I have two decisions, one is more comfortable and one is less comfortable, I've found that if I choose less comfortable option, it always ends up being a better adventure. So for me, I'm striving to find discomfort, maybe not always uncomfortable, but anti-comfortable seems to be my answer. Now, it wasn't always this way. 5 years ago, I was here in Santa Barbara, leading a very comfortable life. I had a comfortable career, a comfortable home, a nice car, living in paradise here in Santa Barbara with all of you. Pretty much everything was going right. And then I ended up right up there on the top of Half Dome with two of my college buddies. We climbed up to the top, and one of them offhandedly remarked, "Hey, maybe we should quit our jobs and thru-hike the Appalachian Trail." Well, at the time, I knew nothing about the Appalachian Trail, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to quit my job. So we both did that. Ryan and I both quit our jobs, sold most of everything that we owned, and packed a backpack and headed out to the East Coast. We were going to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail from Georgia all the way to Maine, 2,184 miles across 14 different states along the Atlantic seaboard. It ended up being a pretty incredible adventure. This is a photo from my first day along the Appalachian Trail. You can see my backpack. It was huge. I was totally over-prepared. My backpack weighed nearly 50 pounds, and that created a lot of discomfort for the first couple of days. Over the next couple hundred miles, as I continued hiking north, I shed everything that wasn't important, anything that wasn't a utility to me. Extra pairs of socks, all of my underwear, even my stove. I sent all that stuff home and went down to just the bare necessities. And when I finished the Appalachian Trail, I was hiking with a backpack that was closer to about 20 pounds. The biggest thing I learned from that is that in life, I really don't need that much. And if I can operate with less, a lot of times whatever I'm doing is a lot more enjoyable. And that's a lesson I brought back home. But I spent the next couple months waking up every morning, packing up my tent and my camp, and hiking north, following white blazes. These little white blazes along the Appalachian Trail, there are 160,000 of them between Georgia and Maine. And all we had to do every single day was hike north. We hiked through a lot of different areas, communities, and cultures. In the south, we started on the Appalachian Trail. Then we crossed the Mason-Dixon line and we were on the Appalachian Trail. And it is a big difference, especially all the small trail communities that we walked into and the different type of people that we met along the way. We drank water right out of springs coming straight out of the rocks. This is the most pure, beautiful water you can find. This is the kind of water we buy in stores here, but it was all for free for us anywhere we went along the Appalachian Trail. We ate copious amounts of food. I mean, every trail town we got to, it was finding the nearest buffet, the pizza bar, or 1-pound hamburgers. Whatever we ate is pretty much what the typical American should not eat, but we were devouring it. We were hiking so much each day and trying not to lose weight that on the trail we were eating 5,000 calories every single day, and in town we were eating a lot more than that. We traversed beautiful mountain ranges from the Smoky Mountains in the south to the White Mountains in the Presidential Range in New Hampshire, and we camped in some pretty epic locations, watching gorgeous sunsets and stunning sunrises that I'll remember for the rest of my life. And 136 days later, 4.5 months later, I found myself on top of Mount Katahdin in the middle of Maine in Baxter State Park, and I was officially an Appalachian Trail thru-hiker. I had done the entire thing. I left for the Appalachian Trail thinking that all of my questions about life would be answered. I'd come home knowing exactly what I wanted to do, and it was totally the opposite. I came home knowing what I didn't want to do, but I had more questions about what I wanted my life to become. When I look back at the Appalachian Trail, the best memories, though, are these people. The different people I met along the way, the relationships we had, the friends that are still my best friends today. I may have only hiked with them for a day or two, but we became so close in such a short amount of time. All the views were beautiful, the campsites were amazing, but when I did something like this, I realized the most important part was the people. So I ended up back in Santa Barbara and failed horrendously at trying to come back to normal life. It just didn't work. I had a regular job again, but I felt like I was missing something. I needed to replace the physical stresses of the Appalachian Trail with something else in my life. I had been a runner, and on the Appalachian Trail, we regularly hiked 25, 30, up to 40 miles a day with a full backpack. So I decided maybe I should try something a little bit more extreme, and that was ultramarathon running. So Wikipedia says that an ultramarathon is any foot race longer than the traditional marathon length of 26.2 miles. I say that an ultramarathon is a really long, long way. Not 1 month after being back from the Appalachian Trail, my brother and I had signed up for our first ultramarathon. We drove down to Malibu Creek State Park and ran 30 miles through the Santa Monica Mountains. It was hot, it was steep, it was grueling, it was very uncomfortable. It hurt a lot, but by the end of it, we were hooked. We had done 30 miles in about 6 hours, and we had a blast. We met a lot of other ultramarathon running people in the Southern California area and started running all around this area. This is a photo from my next race, which was a 65-mile race, and it's called Are You Tough Enough? And it's right here in Santa Barbara. It's a 65-mile race that starts in Carpinteria, goes straight up Gibraltar to the top of the mountains, crosses Camino Cielo, and drops into San Ynez Valley. 65 miles running it solo took us about 14 hours, and it was a pretty incredible day. We decided to branch out beyond just Southern California, and a group of us went over to the Grand Canyon, and we ran rim to rim to rim. So running rim to rim to rim means we start on the south rim before sunrise, and we dive down into the Grand Canyon. You run all the way to the Colorado River. Then you run all the way past Phantom Ranch to the north rim. From there, you just turn around and you run back. It ended up being a 47-mile day, and with a really good group of friends, we finished it in about 17 hours. I did a lot of other racing around Southern California and the Southwest, and some of the more interesting races included this. This is the man against horse 50-mile race in northern Arizona. It's a race pitting 30 runners against 30 horseback riders in the mountains above Prescott, Arizona. And it's quite an experience to be jockeying in position with horseback riders on a single track mountain trail. It was really interesting because on a lot of the steep uphills, the horseback riders had to dismount and walk their horses up the hill while I would run past. And on a downhill, they'd come galloping around me. So it was just a different type of an experience. I also ran some pretty sacred races in some really interesting places. This is Canyon de Chelly on the Navajo Reservation in northern Arizona, and once a year they open it up to let 150 people run with the Navajo people, and it was a very spiritual feeling. I also did a race similar to that with the Hopi people on the Hopi Reservation. And then I've also just done some really stupid stuff. I always wondered what it would be like to run a marathon around a city block, so one morning in Santa Barbara I woke up, walked down to the park, and started running, and after 89 loops, I had completed 26.2 miles around one city block. And I can tell you, that was seriously boring. I don't think I'm gonna ever do that one again. And then getting into ultra running and meeting a lot of other ultra runners, eventually I got addicted to this pinnacle event. I was running 30-mile races, 50-mile races, 62-mile races, but I wanted to do the next. I wanted to move up to a 100-mile race. So in 2014, my brother and I both signed up for the Burning River 100-mile race in Cleveland, Ohio, and we spent 24 hours and 15 minutes out on the race course and finished our first 100-mile race on foot. I was doing all of this running and adventuring while living here in Santa Barbara. I had been back from the Appalachian Trail. I had restarted my career. I wasn't necessarily living in an apartment. I had learned off the Appalachian Trail that I didn't want to own a lot of stuff anymore, so I got rid of most everything that I owned, and I was actually just couch surfing, staying with friends on the couches, working from Monday to Friday, and on the weekends at Friday at 5, I would just leave and head out to the desert or up to the mountains and go camping, adventuring, and then I'd be back on Monday morning about 7 or 8 in the morning. I'd roll into the office smelling like campfire, knowing that I had a pretty epic weekend. So I was doing all this and decided I really didn't want to pay for an apartment. I didn't want to pay for it. I didn't really need all that space. So I did the next logical thing in my mind, which was take the back seats out of my Honda Element and build in my own little house. So I took the back seats out, built a sleeping platform, a closet and everything because I was still coming to Rotary and I had to get fancy on Fridays. And this became my new home, my 35 square foot Honda Element home that I lived in here in Santa Barbara while continuing to work at my regular job and attending Rotary on Fridays. It worked out really well. I could sleep anywhere for free. I knew how to get showers at the gym. It was a pretty nice lifestyle. Plus I was packed and ready for every weekend adventure, and I would head up to Death Valley or drive up to San Francisco through Big Sur or head down to San Diego or out to Joshua Tree. And it was a great way to explore all of Southern California and all of the great natural areas that we have close by. The most interesting thing though is as I was doing this, I was also president of our Rotary Club. And as far as I know, I'm probably the only homeless Rotary Club president ever, anywhere. But I don't know if all of you knew that, but we survived that year, so. As I was doing all this, I kind of got addicted to the whole van life scene, and I ended up buying an upgraded van, or upgraded to a new home. And if you're interested, this is what moving day looks like if you live in a van. I had purchased a Volkswagen van, and I drove both of my homes down to the beach right across the street here. And within about an hour, I'd moved all of my possessions from my old house to my new house. This 1985 Volkswagen van was definitely an upgrade for me. The Honda Element was perfectly fine. It was about 35 square feet. The Volkswagen van is 80 square feet, so that's palatial. But the important part was it had a 2-burner gas stove, it had a gas propane refrigerator, and it had a sink with water line running to it. So I had everything that I would need on the inside of my van. It also offered just a lot more living space, and I could live out of it a little bit better. But the best part was it had room for 4. So I could actually take friends with me on my adventures. We could drive with 4 people in this van, and I could pop the top, and on the top there's a 2-person bed on the top, and there's a 2-person bed on the bottom. So it was a lot more fun traveling with people than traveling solo all the time. So I was still living here in Santa Barbara, had my regular job, traveling on the weekends, but I was starting to get antsy again. I knew what I was doing. I knew where to sleep around town. I had the gym that I could take a shower. Everything was normal. Everything was comfortable, and that's what scared me. So I decided I needed to take another step to expand outside of my comfort zone, and I quit my job again. This time, I wanted to do it sustainably, so I started my own marketing freelance services business, picked up one client that would pay me enough to get on the road, and I hit the road. I spent the summer going through Arizona, heading up into Colorado to explore the Colorado Rockies. I went up to the Tetons and through Wyoming. I had never been to Yellowstone, and it was an incredible place. I headed over to the Oregon coast and spent a week driving up the Oregon coast, surfing, running, and just hanging out in the little villages. I went up through Seattle and across the Cascades to Glacier National Park. I had never even heard of Glacier National Park, and I showed up, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. It's so raw and rugged in an amazing place. I drove across the Midwest, tried to fit in my hippie van with all the farm tractors, but I didn't really fit in very well. I spent a couple weeks at home visiting my family, and I learned very quickly that these Amish buggies in my hometown pretty much have about the same amount of horsepower as my van. And after a good visit at home with my mom, the weather started changing, and it was starting to get cold, and I knew for sure that I did not want to spend a winter in the Midwest. So I continued south. I drove through the Appalachian Mountains and the Great Smoky Mountains in autumn with all the colors bursting, all the reds, all the leaves. It was a really beautiful time to drive through that area. I made it all the way down to Florida, hung out on the Atlantic coast, and drove down to A1A through Florida all the way to the Keys, all the way to Key West. And I spent a week in the Keys between Key West and the Middle Keys, camping, hammocking, just relaxing and enjoying everything that the Keys have to offer. But if you've been to Florida, you realize it's incredibly flat, and I prefer mountains, so I could only stay there so long before I headed back along the Gulf Coast and back out west. And 6 months after I quit my job in Santa Barbara and started living on the road, I made it back to Prescott, Arizona, where my family lives. I had driven 20,000 miles, visited 11 national parks, and saw a lot of friends and family along the way. But again, I was feeling comfortable. It was becoming normal. I knew where to sleep. I knew where to work. I needed to change it again. So I decided to take everything that I would need for the winter and put it in a backpack. And then I put my van into storage, and I wanted to move somewhere international, where I didn't know the language, where I didn't know the culture, where I didn't know where I would sleep every night. I didn't really care where I was going to go. I just had 3 criteria. I wanted it to be warm, I wanted it to be cheap, and I needed Wi-Fi so I could continue working. So I found 6 countries that I wouldn't mind living in and wrote them on a piece of paper, and then I numbered them 1 to 6 and rolled a die. Whatever number came up, I was booking a one-way flight. I rolled the die, and it was Ecuador, and a few weeks later I found myself standing on the equator in Ecuador. I spent 2 months vagabonding around Ecuador, from the mountains down to the Amazon basin, out to the beaches. My brother even came to visit, and we spent a week in the Galapagos Islands, island hopping. We did a lot of snorkeling with sea lions and sea turtles, penguins. We went up into the highlands and hung out with the giant tortoises. And then I went back to the mainland of Ecuador, and I actually ran into a guy who lives in a van just like mine, and he was driving it from New Mexico to the tip of South America. So I jumped in his van for a few weeks, and we rambled down the Peruvian coastline, surfing and eating fish all the way. I made it to Lima and headed inland so that I could go hike the 4-day Inca Trail and go visit Machu Picchu. And after 3 months being in South America, I've kind of had my fill. Winter was coming on in the southern hemisphere, and I was itchy to get back here, to get back in my van and enjoy summer in North America. So I left Lima, I flew home, and as soon as I landed in North America, I did the one thing that I'd been craving all 3 months in South America. I picked up some PBR. This past summer, the biggest event that I did was race across America. Some of you might know Rob. He's on the bicycle. He's been in Santa Barbara, and he's a Rotarian in the Los Angeles area, and he's my good friend. He's an endurance cyclist, and he raced in RAM, Race Across America. It's a 3,000-mile bike race from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland, and it's nonstop. He was a solo racer, and he had to finish all 3,000 miles in less than 12 days. So I volunteered on his crew. I was one of 15 people. From the moment he started until he finished 12 days later, he was on his bicycle 22 hours a day. We were on the night crew, so that means we spent every single night driving behind him. He was in our headlights. We're driving at the speed of a bicycle, just making sure he stayed awake, hydrated, that he had enough food, that we just kept him moving. It was an incredible race to see. He was actually raising money for 3,000 Miles to a Cure. It's an organization that raises funds for brain cancer research, and in the 12 days that he was racing across America, he raised nearly $30,000. About 3 hours short of the cutoff, he rolled into Annapolis, Maryland, and he became one of the few people to finish RAM. It's an incredible endeavor, and it's definitely the hardest thing he's ever done, but I have to say, just crewing him on RAM was the hardest thing I've ever done. So it was a wild experience. After RAM, I headed back to the West Coast. I got my van, and I drove up to San Francisco. My goal for this past summer was to drive across Canada. I had already done the United States, and wanted to try something different. So I picked up my buddy in San Francisco. He had a couple weeks to spare. We drove up to the Olympic Peninsula, took the ferry out to Vancouver Island to Victoria, and we started at mile 0 of the Trans-Canadian Highway. This highway would take me all the way from the Pacific to the edge of the Atlantic. We spent the first couple weeks around British Columbia, hiking, backpacking, hanging out with a bunch of climbing dirtbags and Squamish, and we had a lot of fun, camping out on Forest Service roads, getting as far away from cities as we could. And then we spent a few weeks through Banff and Jasper. And I've been to the Colorado Rockies, but if you've never seen the Canadian Rockies, it's a whole nother story. It's amazing. So Banff and Jasper National Park were great. Then there was the whole middle of the continent. That was not quite as much fun. I dropped Ryan off because he was heading over to Asia to do some backpacking, and I continued on, and I drove through the upper peninsula of Michigan. This photo looks like it could be straight out of the Caribbean, but it's actually in Michigan. So if you ever get a chance to visit Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, this is well worth your time. I headed over to Toronto. My mom and stepdad were heading up to Canada, and they were volunteering for a week at a place called the Gleaners. And the Gleaners are an organization who take leftover produce from supermarkets and farmers that won't be able to sell, and they dice it up, dry it, and put it into soup mixes that are sent to missions in third world countries. So my mom and stepdad were volunteering. I joined them for an entire week. Unfortunately, they had just dropped off a big truckload of broccoli that was growing mold. So we spent the whole week cutting mold off of broccoli, but it was for a good cause. I continued west, made it out to Nova Scotia, hung around a few days in the fishing villages and visiting the lighthouses. Then I took a 6-hour ferry ride out to Newfoundland. I just didn't imagine how far remote Newfoundland is from the mainland. And from Newfoundland, I had to continue another 900 kilometers to get to the very edge of the North American continent. This lighthouse is the furthest east you can get in North America. So I had finished my trans-Canadian drive, and to be honest, I was definitely ready to be over it. I was kind of looking forward to head south and get to warmer weather. The first thing I did back in the United States was stop at Cadillac Mountain in Bar Harbor, Maine. And if you stand on top of Cadillac Mountain and watch the sunrise, you will be the first person in the United States to see the sunrise. So that was a cool experience. I rambled down the East Coast, visiting all these little towns and fishing villages in New England, made my way to Cape Cod, and then drove back to the Appalachian Mountains. My mom and stepdad were again volunteering for another week, this time in West Virginia. My uncle was the foreman on a construction crew, and West Virginia had epic, really massive floods this summer, and it washed away so many homes. So my uncle was helping rebuild some of these homes. We spent the week drywalling, mudding, taping, and what I learned from that experience is that I'm definitely glad I live in a van. I do not want to be a homeowner, and I never really want to ever do drywall ever again. But it was also for a good cause. I headed back west and spent Thanksgiving with my brother in Denver, and we did some hiking above Vail. Then I stopped in Utah, and I'd always wanted to visit the Wave. And if you haven't heard of the Wave, it's this sandstone sculpted by the wind. It's in the middle of nowhere, no man's land between southern Utah and Arizona. And you can actually only 20 people can visit the wave every day. You have to get a permit. So I stopped in Kanab, Utah, and I was one of the lucky 20 people who got a permit to hike in on this day, and I'm really glad I did that. And then I made it back to Arizona and spent Christmas in Arizona doing a little bit of camping. I actually didn't live in my van in northern Arizona for the last month. I've been living with my grandfather at his retirement home, and let me tell you, living in an assisted living center at 33 years old gives you a good perspective on life. So a year and a half of driving, I've covered nearly 45,000 miles. I've been back and forth across the continent. I'm hoping this next summer to not do quite as much driving. My next step is I'm actually parking the van in about a month, and I'm heading back to South America with my friend. We're training for a race across America, but we're not doing a solo race. We're racing as a 4-person team, and we're going to go train and bike tour in South America from Santiago, Chile down through Patagonia for 2 months, and then come back up and be ready to race in June. So when I tell my story or people find out what I'm doing, a lot of times the first question they ask is, how do I pay for this? How do I continue to stay on the road? Where do I get my money? Well, I work. I work for myself. I do my own freelance marketing. I typically do websites, brochures, prep for trade shows. But since I work for myself, my office looks different than it used to. It's no longer a cubicle. I'm no longer 9 to 5. My office can sometimes be on the top of a hostel in Quito, Ecuador, or in a cafe in South America, or even here in Santa Barbara at the Food Tools office. This is my main client, and I'll work with Food Tools for the next couple weeks, and when everyone goes home at night, I'll pull my van in, string up my hammock, and I'll continue working, because I know that putting in these hours will allow me to stay on the road. So all these pictures and all these stories make this lifestyle look easy and great and beautiful, but where I came up with this whole idea of AntiComfortable is there's a lot of challenge that you have to go through to get to these amazing places. And it all started on the Appalachian Trail, especially that first day carrying a 50-pound backpack.
So day 2 on the Appalachian Trail. My feet hurt, my thighs hurt, my butt hurts, my hips hurt, my back hurts, my shoulder hurts, my toes hurt, and I'm tired. But all in all, it's a pretty good day so far.
So the Appalachian Trail was not physically easy to do, but it made getting to the top of a mountain or seeing a sunrise somewhere that much more worth it. We also dealt with a lot of weather. So waking up with 3 inches of snow outside your tent and you're pulling your boots in with snow covered all over them, you know you got to put your feet right back into frozen, wet, cold boots. It's not that enjoyable. And then we would have just days and days of rain, where all you would do is just walk through the rain and everything except for your sleeping bag is wet, and all you want to do is get back to town and dry everything out. And then of course just dirt and mud along the Appalachian Trail. Those are the not so enjoyable parts that if you're just willing to laugh at yourself or be present with the discomfort, it makes the highs that you reach later a lot better. After the Appalachian Trail and I came back to this comfortable normal life, I realized I wasn't getting that anymore, and that's why I got into ultra running. And with ultra running, you go through the same thing but on a smaller scale. This was at mile 91 in our 100-mile race. My brother and I were nearby each other, and we both came into the last aid station and just collapsed. At this point, I was hallucinating. I couldn't eat anything anymore. I couldn't drink anything. I couldn't stay awake. All I wanted to do was fall asleep, quit, and pass out. But the only thing you can really do is get up and keep going. So that low at mile 91 made finishing that 100-mile race all the better. And then van life. There's this social phenomenon right now. I'm living this van life, and everyone makes the pictures look so amazing, and this lifestyle, everyone's envious. Well, a lot of times what you don't see is the struggles that all these people in vans are going through. For example, driving a 30-year-old van with no air conditioning through the Arizona desert in July on one of the hottest days. Outside it was 115 degrees. Inside my van it was 110. No AC. There was nothing to do. And then there's also the opposite. Really cold days where everything is frozen and you're just scraping ice off your windshield.
Looks like unfortunately the problem is most of the ice is on the inside of the van.
That day was so cold, it was 25 degrees inside my van when I woke up, and when I turned on my water faucet to make my coffee, I broke the faucet straight off because all the water was frozen. So there's ups and downs. Sleeping. I don't normally sleep in the national forest or in campsites. A lot of times, since I'm still working, I need to be close to Wi-Fi and electricity. So it means I end up sleeping in truck stops and rest areas and Walmart parking lots most often. And Walmart parking lots are interesting. I never would have known that Walmart cleans their parking lots at 2 a.m. with street sweepers. But when one drives right past your bedroom window, it's hard to avoid it. Another challenge can be law enforcement. Now, I live a pretty legal life. but living in the van is kind of on the fringe, so I know some people run into situations. But other than border crossings and driving the hippie van into Canada and trying to get back in the United States, I've done pretty well. This was actually, I wasn't really getting pulled over. Some of you might recognize him. He's the guy that hiked the Appalachian Trail with me. And after the trail, he became a park ranger, and I stopped to visit him, and he pulled me over on the way to his house. Another challenge that I've had to learn how to overcome is showering. So when I was here in Santa Barbara, my life was simple because I had a gym membership, and I knew where I could take a shower all the time. As I travel, when I visit friends and family, I can shower at their place. But if I'm on the road for a few weeks at a time, I need to find my own ways to take a shower. I don't pay for campsites. I don't pay for a gym membership. So typically it ends up being me using this solar shower bag in a parking lot or on the side of the street somewhere. And unfortunately, on days like this day in Austin, Texas, it wasn't sunny. So the solar shower ends up being just a really cold shower. And then the biggest challenge of living on the road has been breaking down. And if you're going to drive a 30-year-old van, you're going to break down. And it's typically in the most inopportune situations. So here I broke down in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. I had to get a 100-mile tow to the closest mechanic that would work on a Volkswagen van. It was a weekend, so I had to sleep in their parking lot for a few days until they would actually come back to work and fix my van. But it's all those little things that make you realize how good life can be when it is good. And owning this van, you kind of become a de facto Volkswagen mechanic. I don't really know what I'm doing in this picture, but I thought it looked all right. But it's all those challenges that have made this worthwhile. Camping in Sedona for a week, being out in the middle of nowhere, waking up to the red rocks, living in nature, taking time away from the normal hustle and bustle of life, taking the time to spend weeks with my mom or weeks with my dad or living with my grandfather in a retirement home. I'm willing to go through the uncomfortable moments or the discomfort or live anti-comfortable so that I can have these things that are well worth my time. And that's what I would like to say. Anything in life, I wouldn't suggest that anyone should go do what I'm doing. It might look kind of fun sometimes, but if you can just do little things that change the way you're operating, if you drive a different way to work or try a different restaurant or just do one little new thing that takes you outside of your comfort zone every day, I think that's what makes life worth living. Thank you.